Deep in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, there's an ancient site that holds one of engineering's greatest, and I mean greatest, mysteries, the ruins of Baalbek. Now, they're famous for these magnificent Roman temples, but it's what's underneath them that's the real puzzle. A foundation so massive, it challenges everything we think we know about the ancient world. So let's dive in and try to piece this incredible story together. The site's former curator, Michel Alouf, he just nails it with this quote. He basically says words can't do it justice. When you're standing there looking at these stones, the feeling is just bewildering. And that feeling has hooked travelers and archaeologists for centuries. It's a genuine, real-life mystery. And that sense of wonder, that feeling of impossibility, it all boils down to one simple, unbelievable fact: the sheer, mind-boggling size of the stones they used to build this place. So you see these incredible Roman temples, right? Absolutely magnificent, dedicated to Jupiter. But what most people don't realize is what they're built on. They sit on top of this older platform, a podium wall made of colossal blocks. The most famous of these are three giant stones known as the Trilithon. And their size? Well, that's our first big clue in this investigation. Okay, to really get a feel for this, we've got to take a little trip to a nearby quarry. Lying there, not quite free from the bedrock, is a monolith they call the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. This single block of stone weighs an estimated 1,000 tons. 1,000. To put that in perspective, that's like stacking 3 Boeing 747 jumbo jets. And that was just one stone they planned to move. And you'd think that's the biggest, right? For decades, everyone did. But then, in the 1990s, another one was found right beside it. And this second block is even bigger. It clocks in at a whopping 1,240 tons. Now we're talking about the weight of nearly 15 adult blue whales, all carved into one perfect rectangle. The ambition is just staggering. But wait, it gets even crazier. In 2014, a German archaeological team starts digging a bit deeper. And guess what they find? A third block. This one is the granddaddy of them all. A mind-shattering 1,650 tons. Let that sink in for a second. To this day, it is the largest single block of stone ever quarried by human hands in the ancient world, period. So all of this, all these impossible numbers, it just leads to the one big, glaring question: how? I mean, really, how did anyone quarry, transport, and perfectly place stones of this magnitude with ancient technology? To even start to unravel this, we have to peel back the layers of time, because Baalbek wasn't just some random construction site. This spot has been sacred for a very long time. I mean, people have been living here for over 11,000 years. It became a religious hub for the Phoenicians, who worshipped the sky god Baal, which is where the name Baalbek comes from. Then Alexander the Great rolls in and renames it Heliopolis, the city of the sun. And only after all that history do the Romans even show up on the scene to begin their own massive project. And look, what the Romans built here is absolutely stunning. We're talking the Temple of Jupiter, the largest religious building in their entire empire. The Temple of Bacchus next to it is one of the best preserved Roman temples on Earth. But here's the kicker. All of it, every single column and carving, sits on top of that mysterious colossal foundation. Okay, so let's put on our detective hats. Let's look at case file number 1, the Romans. The mainstream theory is that they, the master engineers of the ancient worlds, did the whole shebang, foundation stones and all. And you know what? The case for the Romans is actually pretty compelling. Archaeologists have found clear Roman-era clues, like a stonemason's graffiti dated to 60 CE, and even a little construction sketch engraved right onto one of the blocks. But the biggest piece of evidence, maybe the smoking gun, was found underneath the giant foundation, a Roman column drum. This strongly suggests the megaliths were placed during or after the Romans started their work. Add to that the fact that there are zero, and I mean zero, pre-Roman texts that even mention these stones, and the case seems pretty solid. So if they did do it, how? Well, the accepted theory is all about brute force and clever engineering. They would have quarried the stones, heaved them onto massive wooden rollers, and then, using dozens of capstans, think of them as giant human-powered winches, thousands and thousands of laborers would just pull, slowly, inch by inch. Then, they'd build these enormous earthen ramps to hoist the blocks into their final position. It sounds plausible, right? I mean, it could work on paper, but there are some major holes in that theory. And those holes open the door to something much older and a whole lot weirder: the pre-Roman enigma. And this is where it gets really interesting, something you could just see with your own eyes. You look at the stones of the Roman temples up top, and they're relatively smooth, pretty well preserved. But then you look down at the giant foundation blocks they're sitting on, and it is a completely different story. They show extensive erosion from wind and sand, the kind of weathering that suggests they've been sitting out in the elements for a much, much longer time. And the doubts just keep piling up. For one, this project is bigger than anything else the Romans ever built, anywhere. Yet the Romans, who wrote down everything, left no records of this, their greatest engineering achievement. Not one. The style is different too, rough and massive, not like the elegant Roman work above. And honestly, the logistics of dragging 1,650 tons over rough, uphill terrain, it's almost impossible to imagine. It's no wonder the local legends don't credit the Romans. They say a race of giants built it. So where does that leave us? We're stuck with two incredible possibilities. Either the Romans pulled off an engineering miracle so far beyond their other projects that it's almost unbelievable, or they built their magnificent temple on the ruins of a civilization so ancient we've completely forgotten it ever existed. So the ultimate question is this: are the stones of Baalbek a testament to the incredible power of human will pushed to its absolute limit? Or are they evidence of a lost technology from our distant past?
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're heading way up into the high plains of Bolivia to look at an architectural marvel that has just, well, baffled people for centuries. We're talking about the incredible stonework of Tiahuanaco.
So when you go to this ancient site, especially a place called Pumapunku, this is what you see. It's like a giant's puzzle. You've got these massive andesite and sandstone blocks just scattered all over the place. They're unbelievably complex, masterfully crafted, and they're just lying in this total jumble, hinting that something truly magnificent once stood here before it was destroyed.
I mean, the precision is just breathtaking. When the first explorers stumbled on these ruins, they were completely stunned. This guy, Ephraim Squire, writing way back in the 1870s, he couldn't even guess how these stones were made. He noted that he couldn't see a single chisel mark on them. The skill was just so far beyond anything he could possibly imagine.
And that, right there, is the huge mystery we're going to unpack today. How was this even possible? What kind of techniques, what kind of knowledge did the builders of Tiahuanaco have? Okay, let's dive in and find out.
So, to solve this puzzle, we've got to treat it like a crime scene and look at the evidence. And maybe the most important clue is just how different Tiahuanaco stonework is from the people who came after them, the much more famous Incas.
The difference is really night and day when you put them side by side. So on the right, you've got the classic Inca style. See how the blocks are kind of rounded and pillowy, fitting together organically? But Tiahuanaco on the left is something else entirely. It's all about perfectly flat, planar surfaces and these razor-sharp right angles. The stones meet flawlessly in all three dimensions.
And really, the heart of this whole mystery is Pumapunku. It's this low mound just littered with hundreds of these ridiculously complex blocks. And here's the kicker: most of them are unfinished. That suggests they weren't just taken from some building that was torn down. No, it looks more like a workshop, where one day, everyone just dropped their tools and walked away, leaving all these amazing clues behind for us.
So how did they do it? For years, people have imagined all sorts of things: lost technologies, superhuman strength. But the big breakthrough came when researchers realized they were looking at the whole problem completely wrong. It wasn't about carving one giant, unique stone at a time.
Here's the thing. The builders of Tiahuanaco weren't just incredible sculptors. They were systematic engineers. They created an entire architectural system, and it was all based on repeatable, standardized parts.
They made standardized components, like these blocks you see here with these intricate cross designs. So even though a lot of the stones look really complex and unique, when you look closely, you see they share designs and dimensions. You can think of it like a kit of parts.
And this is a brilliant example of an idea we think of as totally modern: prefabrication. Because all the stones were standardized, masons could just mass-produce them in a workshop, maybe miles away at the quarry, and they didn't even need to know where that specific stone would end up in the final building. It's genius. These standardized parts could then just be brought to the site and put together to create these incredibly complex patterns. It really is like a puzzle, where every piece, even though it was made separately, fits perfectly into this huge pre-planned design. The level of coordination this would have taken is just unheard of for the ancient Andes.
Okay, so knowing they used a system, that's one thing, but that still leaves a huge question. How did they physically cut this incredibly hard andesite stone with that kind of precision?
Well, to answer this, researchers turned to something called experimental archaeology. Basically, they decided to try and recreate the whole process themselves, but with one major rule. They could only use the simple stone tools that would have been available back then.
And you know what? They figured it out. They discovered this whole multi-step process that, yeah, it was a ton of work, but it didn't require any lost super technology. First, you pound a surface perfectly flat with hammerstones. Then, you use a template to trace your design. After that, you rough out the big chunks of material. And finally, you use smaller tools to get those incredibly fine details and those perfect, sharp interior corners.
And here's the absolute best part. The proof is written right on the stones themselves. Unfinished blocks at Pumapunku, just like this one, show the exact same sequence of tool marks that they found in the experiments. You can see the rough pock marks from the big hammerstones and then the finer marks from chisels right in the corners. The evidence was there the whole time.
So this really proves it. The incredible work at Tiahuanaco wasn't because of some forgotten high-tech solution or, ancient aliens. It was the result of pure human ingenuity, a deep, deep understanding of geometry, immense skill that was honed over generations, and a highly systematic and disciplined process.
So what should you take away from all this? I mean, why does the Tiahuanaco matter, beyond just being a really cool ancient puzzle?
Well, for starters, Tiahuanaco wasn't just some warm-up act for the Incas. Not at all. This place was a hotbed of architectural innovation. They were inventing techniques that you just don't see anywhere else in the ancient Andes. Prefabrication, high-precision measurement, using metal cramps to join blocks, and this incredible puzzle-like assembly. They were true pioneers. Their work, and you can see it in masterpieces like the Gateway of the Sun, stands as its own distinct and brilliant architectural tradition. It's really a testament to a unique vision of order, of precision, and a complete mastery over one of the most difficult materials on the planet.
And ultimately, this wasn't just about building impressive monuments. The Tiahuanaco builders, it seems like they were imposing a human-made geometric order onto the natural landscape. They were emphasizing the artificial, the man-made, over the natural world. And that's a fundamentally different way of thinking from the Inca, who often tried to blend their architecture into nature.
And all of this leaves us with one final, fascinating question. The stones tell us how they built, but the deeper mystery is about the people. What kind of society, what kind of social organization could not only dream up but actually execute such a precise and ambitious architectural vision for generations, solving that puzzle? Well, that's the next great challenge.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're descending into one of the world's most truly enigmatic prehistoric sites. We're talking about a place carved from solid rock, thousands of years before the pyramids. Yeah, you heard that right. So let's head to the island of Malta. Here, you'll find the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum. It's this subterranean maze of chambers, passages, and human remains that has had historians just scratching their heads for over a century. It's really a journey into a Neolithic world that is both stunningly sophisticated and, well, deeply mysterious. To really get a grip on the Hypogeum, we have to start where the locals did, with folklore. You see, for centuries, the sheer scale of Malta's ancient temples just defied any logical explanation, which led to all these incredible tales of giants and impossible feats of engineering. And the most famous of these legends? It tells of a giantess named Sansuna. The stories say she was so strong she could carry 20-ton stones on her head from quarries miles away, all while holding her half-human baby in one arm. Just imagine that. And this is where the real mystery kicks in. On one hand, you've got these above-ground temples, like Gigantea, a name that literally means giant's tower, and they're built with these absolutely colossal stones. But then, on the other hand, you have this tiny, delicate, serene, sleeping lady figurine found deep within the earth. It really leaves us with a huge question. Who built this world? Were they the colossal giants of myth, or were they a sophisticated, artistic culture with a really deep spiritual life? Okay, so let's fast forward to modern times. The story of how we found the Hypogeum, it doesn't begin with some grand funded expedition. Nope, it starts with a simple construction accident in 1902 that literally cracked open the earth and revealed this lost world below. But from the very moment of its rediscovery, the site's secrets were almost lost all over again. The workers who found it actually tried to hide it. They were worried it would delay their project. And when the excavation finally did begin, a whole new mystery was created that honestly persists to this day. The first excavator, a guy named Father Magri, was a respected archaeologist. But in 1907, he died suddenly while on a mission in Tunisia, and his excavation notes, the only record of what they found in those initial digs, they just vanished, and they have never been found. The second excavator, Sir Themistocles Zamet, he didn't have much better luck. He reported that the damp conditions and all the layers of earth had just turned much of the human evidence into dust. So right from the get-go, crucial information was just gone, making the puzzle of who was buried here and why even harder to solve. So what did they actually build down there? Let's descend inside. The hypogeum is carved into 3 distinct levels, and each one takes us deeper into the limestone and deeper into the mystery. The upper level, which dates all the way back to 4000 BC, is the most primitive. It really feels like a natural cave system that was then expanded by human hands. This is where the earliest burials happened, like a gateway between the world of the living and the world of the dead. But you go deeper and wow, the middle level is an absolute architectural masterpiece. The builders sculpted the rock to look just like the megalithic temples on the surface, with doorways, windows, and ceilings all painted with these beautiful red ochre spirals. And it's here that we find a chamber with a truly remarkable property. Okay, let's dive into this because the oracle room on this level is unique. There's a small niche in the wall that creates this powerful resonance effect. So a male voice, chanting at a low pitch, can make the entire complex vibrate with sound, particularly at a frequency of 114 hertz. Now, what's really fascinating here is that archaeoacoustic research suggests this isn't just some random quirk. Sound at this specific frequency range has been shown to directly impact human brain activity, capable of shifting consciousness into a meditative or even a trance-like state. It's almost like the builders literally engineered this space to alter the minds of the people who came here. And finally, a staircase leads down to the third and deepest level. But down here, 11 meters below the surface, it's strangely empty. No bones, no art. It kind of feels unfinished with some passages still unexplored, which has led to all sorts of speculation that the true depths of the hypogeum have yet to be revealed. But perhaps the most sensational discovery, and the source of the most persistent and wild theories, was the thousands of human remains found all jumbled together in the chambers, especially the skulls. Initial reports estimated that the remains of up to 7,000 individuals were found here. Now, modern analysis suggests the number of complete individuals was likely much lower, but still, it was a massive collective burial site, an ossuary used for generations. But some of the skulls, they weren't normal. Yeah, among the remains were skulls that were strangely elongated. So, on one side, some people claimed this was evidence of a lost race of humans, pointing to a skull that reportedly lacked the sagittal suture, that's the seam that runs down the middle of a typical skull. On the other side, though, there's a more scientific explanation: artificial cranial deformation. This was a tradition where an infant's head was intentionally reshaped by binding it, often to signify high status. So you've got these strange skulls, lost notes, and eerie acoustics. It's all fueled decades and decades of speculation. So let's try and separate the sourced facts from the popular fiction that has grown up all around the site. One of the most famous and, frankly, chilling stories is about a class of school children who took a field trip into the hypogeum back in the 1930s, entered a lower tunnel, and were just never seen again. For weeks, people claimed their mothers could hear their cries from beneath the ground. Okay, so here's the thing. While this story was printed in a 1940 National Geographic article, there are no official reports, no newspaper articles, and no records of a missing class or teacher from that time. It's most likely a very powerful urban legend, a really effective cautionary tale. All right, here's another one. This tale comes from a tourist named Lois Jessup, who claimed that during a tour in the 1930s, she squeezed into a small side passage and came to a ledge overlooking a deep cavern. And from below, she said, giant, hairy beings emerged and beckoned to her. And this story brilliantly illustrates how the site's genuine mysteries provide the perfect fertile ground for even the most fantastical tales. Now, while Jessup was a real person and her account was published, the chambers she described simply don't exist in the known parts of the hypogeum. A more plausible explanation is that she was just disoriented by flickering candle reflections in a flooded lower chamber. But even after we debunk the wilder myths, we are still left with these profound and totally legitimate questions about this Stone Age civilization and the purpose of this incredible underground temple. Let's look again at the sleeping lady. She's not just resting, she's lying in a very specific posture. Some researchers have pointed out that her position is identical to the sleeping tiger pose used in Tao stream practices, a technique designed to help you have conscious or lucid dreams. So, could the hypogeum have been a place for receiving prophetic dreams? A chamber where priestesses entered trance states to commune with the underworld? The hypogeum really forces us to reconsider what was even possible in the Stone Age. It suggests a culture with a sophisticated understanding of architecture, acoustics, and maybe even the human mind itself. Which leaves us to wonder, what other secrets about consciousness and the spirit did these ancient people understand that we have since forgotten?
Today, we are going to unpack 5,000 years of Korean history. But we're not going to do it with textbooks. Nope. We're doing it by exploring its incredible collection of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Let's see what stories these places have to tell.
So you look at Korea and you see this incredible contrast, right? On one side, you have these ancient, peaceful mountain temples, and on the other, you have these giant, buzzing, modern cities. So you have to wonder, how do the quiet stories from the past, the ones literally carved in stone, still find a way to be heard in today's fast-paced world?
And get this, for a country its size, having 25 designated heritage sites is, well, it's astounding. It's a huge testament to a really long and rich history. This tells you we're not just looking at a few random landmarks. We're looking at this dense, amazing tapestry of human achievement.
But it's not just about preserving old buildings, These sites, they represent these really powerful ideas that have shaped what it means to be Korean for thousands of years. So to really get it, we've got to look past the what and start asking why.
Okay, so let's start with the spiritual foundations. For centuries, faith wasn't just this personal thing. It was the absolute bedrock of the state, and it inspired some of the most breathtaking art and architecture you'll find anywhere on the peninsula. So, back in the unified Shilla period, starting in the 7th century, Buddhism was basically the ultimate tool for building a nation. It gave everyone a shared faith, which helped unite these old rival kingdoms, and it also gave the king this divine right to rule. And all of that led to this incredible explosion of state-sponsored art.
And here's a perfect example of that golden age, Bulguksa Temple. It was built in the 8th century, but it wasn't just a place to pray. The whole thing was designed to be a physical version of the Buddhist paradise, like bringing an ideal world to life, right here on Earth.
And nearby, you've got the Setgaram Grotto, which is carved right into a mountainside. But the incredible part? This isn't a natural cave. It was meticulously built using over 360 huge granite blocks just to create the perfect sanctuary for the Buddha statue inside. It's an absolute marvel of art and engineering.
This focus on the sacred, it also carried over into the afterlife. So on the left, you see these huge, rolling, grassy burial mounds for Silla royalty. Then on the right, you have the much more formal, structured stone tombs from the Joseon dynasty, centuries later. You can literally see the evolution of beliefs about life, death, and how to be remembered, just by looking at the landscape.
Okay, so now let's see how all that spiritual authority connects to worldly power. We're going to shift from the sacred realm to the palaces and the fortresses, the places where dynasties showed off their authority, organized their society, and, of course, defended their right to rule. This is Cheongdeokgung Palace in Seoul. For more than 300 years, this was the heart of the Joseon dynasty. What's so cool is that unlike a lot of European palaces built on these rigid grids, Cheongdeokgung was designed to blend in with nature, to work with its surroundings. That says as much about Korean philosophy as it does about architecture.
Power in the Joseon dynasty really rested on two main pillars. On the left, you have the spiritual authority of Jungmyo Shrine, where the spirits of ancestors were honored. And on the right, you have the raw military power of Hwasong Fortress. One secured their legitimacy from the past, the other made sure they survived in the present.
Jungmyo wasn't just some building, it was the spiritual heart of the entire dynasty. By performing these really detailed Confucian ceremonies here, every king connected himself to this long, unbroken line of revered ancestors that reinforced his right to rule and the stability of the whole kingdom. Now just look at this timeline for Hwaseng Fortress, a massive fortress almost 6 kilometers long, and they finished it in under 3 years. For the late 1700s, that speed is almost unbelievable.
So how on earth did they do it? Pure innovation. This brilliant scholar designed brand new equipment like cranes and pulleys. They used standardized materials and, get this, in a really progressive move, they paid the laborers instead of forcing them to work. It was a monument to smart science and enlightened thinking. All right, so from stone and steel, we're going to turn to an even more powerful tool, the written word. Korea's contributions to printing and literacy completely changed how knowledge was shared, and in doing so, empowered people and helped forge a totally unique national identity. What you're looking at here is one of the most important artifacts in the history of information, period. These are recreated metal typepieces that were used to print a Buddhist text called Jikji. This wasn't just a book, it was a revolution in how ideas could spread. And this is where history kind of gets turned on its head. We all learn about Gutenberg's printing press from around 1450, but Jikji was printed in Korea with movable metal type in 1377. That's more than 70 years earlier. This one fact just completely reframes a key moment in human history. It's incredible.
And that amazing spirit of innovation didn't stop there. Just about 70 years after Jikji, Korea had another huge breakthrough in literacy, the Hanminjeongeum. This is the manuscript that introduced the world to the Korean alphabet, Hangul.
And the reason for it was just so democratic. King Seong the Great was frustrated that everyday people couldn't easily read or write using the complicated Chinese characters they had at the time. So he personally oversaw the creation of a new, much simpler script for them.
And it is scientifically brilliant. The consonants are literally designed to look like the shape your mouth makes when you say them. The vowels are based on these simple philosophical ideas. And all the letters get grouped into these neat little blocks. I mean, this design from the 15th century is so efficient that it's perfectly suited for typing on our modern computers and smartphones today.
So, all of this history, it all leads us to one final, really powerful idea. These treasures aren't just relics locked away in a museum. Many of these ancient traditions are still actively practiced today, creating this incredible, unbroken link to the past. Every single year, the royal ancestral rite is performed at Jongyo Shrine, just as it has been for over 500 years. The music, the dances, the rituals, it's a living piece of history, connecting today directly to the heart of the Joseon dynasty.
And just like these lanterns still glow at Buguksa Temple, the spirit of these places just endures. From ancient prayers to revolutionary alphabets, they're not just tourist destinations. They are the living memory of a nation, a story of resilience and innovation told across thousands of years.
And all that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If a nation's heritage is a reflection of what it values most from its past, then what does this incredible collection of art, science, and spirit tell us about the future that Korea is trying to build today?
Let's just jump right in. We're heading over to Brittany, in northwest France, to get into one of the world's greatest and oldest ancient mysteries, the Carnac Stones. This is a puzzle that's literally been thousands of years in the making.
And when I say it's a massive puzzle, I'm not kidding. This isn't just, a couple of cool rocks in a field. We're talking about the largest concentration of these megalithic monuments anywhere on the planet. Over 3,000 prehistoric standing stones just sprawling for miles and miles across the French countryside.
So, what's the big deal about them? Well, for one, their age. These things were put up by Neolithic communities starting way back around 4700 BCE. Now, to put that in perspective, think about Stonehenge, right? The most famous stone circle in the world? Well, these are over 1,000 years older. Carnac is basically ground zero for this kind of building in Europe.
But here's the crazy part. This isn't just some dusty old story. Fast forward to 2023, and a huge controversy blows up because 39 of these ancient stones were bulldozed to make way for a hardware store. Yeah, you heard that right. And that whole incident just threw a giant spotlight back on the real questions. What even are these things, and why is their future still so uncertain?
Okay, so before we can even get into the why, we got to figure out the what. What are we actually looking at here? Because it's not just one type of thing. It's like the builders had this whole toolkit of different stone structures they were working with.
So you've got 4 basic building blocks. First up is the menhir. Simple enough, it's a single big standing stone. Then you've got the dolmen. Think of it like a giant stone table. There was actually a tomb, and it used to be buried under a big pile of dirt. Third is the tumulus, that's the big earthen mound itself. And fourth, the main event, the part Carnac is famous for, the alignments. These are just, wow, these incredible long parallel rows of stones that go on forever.
And this timeline? Man, it just hammers home how mind-bogglingly old this place is. Thanks to some really precise new dating techniques, we now know that huge tombs were going up here as early as 4700 BCE. The famous alignments followed soon after. This isn't just old, it's the very beginning. This is where it all started.
So, that brings us to the big one, the multi-million-dollar question. People went to all this unbelievable trouble over centuries to build this, but why? What was it all for? Was this a place for tombs, a kind of temple, or maybe some kind of ancient calculator?
The debate really splits into two big camps. On one side, you have Team Cemetery. A lot of these structures were definitely tombs for important people, so it makes sense to think the whole place was a giant city for the dead. But then you've got the other side, because the alignments, the long rows, they aren't tombs, and they just so happen to line up perfectly with where the sun rises on the solstices. That seems like way too much of a coincidence, right?
And this whole skywatching idea got taken to the next level back in the 70s. A researcher named Alexander Thom came along and said, guys, it's not just the sun, it's the moon. He basically proposed it was this incredibly complex observatory where you could use the stones as sightlines to track the moon's wobbly path across the sky and maybe even predict eclipses. I mean, how cool is that?
But, and this is a big but, not everyone was buying it. Almost as soon as he put that theory out there, other experts were like, hold on a second. They went back, re-examined the evidence on the ground, and, well, as you can see from this quote, they found some major reasons to doubt the whole eclipse predictor idea. It's a perfect example of how nothing about Carnac is simple.
All right, so the why is a huge question mark. But what about the who? Who were these people? What was their society like? Well, for that, we have to look inside the tombs, because that's where they left some incredible clues.
And what they found is just mind-blowing. We're talking gorgeous, polished jade axes that came all the way from the Italian Alps. Think about that journey, almost 7,000 years ago. Or turquoise-like beads that were traded from Spain. This wasn't some isolated tribe. These people were major players. They were connected, part of a huge maritime trade network run by leaders so powerful, some archaeologists basically call them divine kings.
And just to give you an idea of how precious this stuff was, check this out. Modern experiments have shown that just one of those big ceremonial jade axes would have taken over 1,000 hours to grind and polish by hand. 1,000 hours! That's just an insane amount of work and craftsmanship.
But okay, there's another newer idea that's gaining traction, and it's all thanks to modern tech. It's a theory that says, hey, maybe we're focusing too much on the individual stones. Maybe the entire landscape is the monument. So using modern mapping software, researchers can analyze the terrain in a way that just wasn't possible before, and they found something really cool. It turns out the placement wasn't random at all. Some tombs are put up on these hills where you can see for miles, but others are tucked away and only give you a view of the immediate area. It's like they were directing your experience, using the land itself to create different feelings in different places.
You know, the story of these stones didn't end when the last one was put up. Over thousands of years, their meaning has just kept changing. It went from this sacred landscape of power to a source of spooky legends to basically a free quarry for building materials, and now, a battleground for modern preservation. And of course, people came up with stories to explain them. You'd have to, right? My favorite is the one where there are Roman legion that got zapped into stone by Merlin the wizard. In another telling, it was Pope Cornelius who did the zapping. The point is, people have always been trying to wrap their heads around this incredible place.
But for a long, long time, nobody saw them as priceless ancient treasures. They were just rocks, a handy pre-cut pile of building material. People took them for roads, for lighthouses, even chicken sheds. Can you believe it? So the incredible sight we see today, it's actually just what's left.
And that brings us right back to where we started. Yeah, the main parts of the site are protected now, but that whole incident in 2023 was a huge wake-up call. It shows that this ancient, one-of-a-kind place is still at risk, caught in this constant tug-of-war between preserving the past and the pressures of the present.
So, where does that leave us? What are the Carnac Stones? A calendar for the cosmos? A city of the dead for ancient kings? A carefully crafted landscape meant to inspire awe? Or maybe after 7,000 years, the real answer is a mix of all of those things. A secret so old and complex, we'll just never quite figure it all out. For now, the stones, they're keeping their silence.
Today, we're heading high up into the Peruvian Andes to a place called Chavín de Huántar. Now, for decades, archaeologists were pretty sure they had the story of this ancient temple all figured out. But brand new science is basically tearing up the rulebook, turning this ancient site into a modern-day cold case.
So let's just start with this question. What if the official story, the one you read in the textbooks, was just completely wrong? Let's peel back the layers on what, for a very long time, was considered settled history.
Chavín de Huántar has been standing for nearly 3,000 years, this massive, mysterious temple. And our entire understanding of it has pretty much rested on two big ideas, two long-held beliefs that defined a whole civilization. Okay, so idea number one was all about how it was built. The accepted story was beautifully simple. They started with a small, U-shaped old temple. And then, over the years, they just added onto it, creating a much bigger new temple, like a straightforward two-act play.
And this wasn't just some random guess. This model came from a well-respected archaeologist, John H. Rowe, way back in 1967. His idea was clean, it made perfect sense, and for more than 50 years, it was just accepted as fact.
The second big idea was about the art and the rituals that went on there. Chavín is famous for these incredible kind of bizarre carvings. They show people transforming into jaguars, eagles, all sorts of powerful animals. The big theory? This was all inspired by intense shamanic rituals. And this wasn't just wild speculation. Top archaeologists like Richard Berger made a strong case that psychoactive drugs were key to the whole operation, that they let priests talk to the gods. It was a really compelling, dramatic story, and almost everyone bought into it. But what if both of those stories, as good as they sound, were wrong? Or at the very least, just not the whole picture? Recently, a team of researchers decided to treat Chavín like an ancient crime scene, bringing in cutting-edge tech to see if the old stories actually held up. First on their list, that simple temple blueprint.
So they brought in a whole new toolkit. We're talking super precise 3D laser mapping, complex computer models. But it wasn't all clean, high-tech lab work. It also meant spending endless hours crawling around in the dark through, bat guano. Science isn't always glamorous.
And what they found? Well, it was a total game changer. The old story gave us the simple map you see on the left. But the new mapping revealed the reality on the right. Not some simple structure, but this incredibly complex labyrinth of tunnels, hidden galleries, and secret rooms.
So that old, tidy three-phase story? Yeah, it got completely blown out of the water. The new evidence showed a construction history that was just way, way more complicated. There weren't 3 phases.
Get this, there were at least 15 distinct building phases. So we're not talking about a simple addition. We're talking about a continuous, complex, constantly evolving project that went on for centuries. This is a total rewrite of the temple's biography.
But maybe the most shocking discovery completely flipped the timeline on its head. For decades, everyone thought the famous circular plaza was one of the oldest parts of the temple. The new research shows it was actually built near the end, around 750 BC. What we thought was the beginning was actually part of the grand finale.
Okay, so the architecture story is totally rewritten, but what about all those psychedelic shaman rituals? I mean, the art is so powerful, the theory is so compelling, but a different team of researchers started asking a really basic question.
Where's the actual proof? For all the talk about hallucinogenic drugs and transformative visions, there has never been a single shred of direct biological or chemical evidence found at Chavín to back it up. The entire theory was based on just looking at the art.
To go hunting for that proof, scientists turned to another amazing tool, mass spectrometry. The best way to think of it is as a machine that can find molecular fingerprints, these tiny, invisible chemical residues left on ancient objects thousands of years ago. So the plan was pretty straightforward, right? Get some samples from artifacts that might have been used in rituals, like bowls or spoons, pop them in the machine, and see what chemical fingerprints show up.
But, of course, there was a catch. Getting permission to actually take physical samples from these sacred artifacts at Chavín was impossible. So the researchers got clever. They decided to do a proof-of-concept test on pottery from a different but related culture, the Paracas, just to see if their method would even work.
And what they found was pretty wild. The tests on that Paracas pottery
showed potential traces of some really powerful stuff. Alkaloids that could be cocaine from coca plants, and even ergotamine, which comes from a fungus. It's a really exciting clue, but, and this is a huge but, it's not direct evidence from Chavín itself, so the case remains open.
So after all of this high-tech detective work, where do we stand with our two big mysteries? We've seen the architectural story get a complete overhaul, and we've seen the ritual story get put to the scientific test for the very first time.
So what's the verdict on this ancient cold case? Well, on the architecture, case solved. We now know Chavín is way more complex than that simple Old Temple, New Temple story. But on the rituals, the case is still very much unsolved. The mystery is still there, but now we actually have the tools that could one day crack it wide open. And that's really the coolest takeaway here, isn't it? Science isn't about finding some final destination where you have all the answers. It's a process, a journey. And every new discovery, every new piece of tech doesn't just answer old questions, it opens up a whole bunch of new, even more interesting ones.
It really makes you wonder, what other long-held fact of history is just sitting there waiting for the right tool and the right team to come along and rewrite its story completely? Thanks for joining me on this one.
All right, let's get right into it. Deep in the mountains of southern Turkey, there's a place that has completely turned the first chapter of the human story on its head. It's called Göbekli Tepe, and believe me, it challenges pretty much everything we thought we knew about our own origins. You know, for generations, the story of how civilization started seemed pretty simple, pretty settled. But what if that whole story has the plot completely backwards? What if the spark that actually ignited society wasn't what we've always been told? Göbekli Tepe forces us to ask that exact question.
For the longest time, archaeologists worked with what you could call the standard model. And it's a really neat, logical, bottom-up story. It goes like this. First, you invent farming. That gives you a ton of food, a surplus. With full bellies, you can stop wandering around, settle down, build villages, and then, and only then, do you have the time and the resources for the complicated stuff, like organized religion and building massive structures. It makes perfect sense. Or at least, it used to.
Then, in 1994, archaeologists started to unearth this. Göbekli Tepe. It's this sprawling complex of massive T-shaped limestone pillars, all arranged in these huge circles. I mean, some of these stones weigh several tons, and they're intricately carved with all these different animals. This was no simple village. This was a massive ceremonial center, and it was built by people who, according to the old story, just shouldn't have been able to do this.
But the real bombshell, that came with the dating. Radiocarbon analysis from the deepest, oldest layers of the site puts its construction around 9600 BCE. That is 11,600 years ago. Just let that number sink in. And this is where the timeline gets absolutely mind-bending. We are talking about a structure that is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It's more than 7,000 years older than the Great Pyramids of Giza. But here's the kicker, the most staggering fact of all. Göbekli Tepe appears to be over 1,000 years older than the widespread adoption of agriculture. The effect came before the cause we always assumed was responsible.
So how in the world does this one single discovery manage to upend everything we thought we knew about human history?
Well, we're suddenly left with two totally competing stories. On the left, you've got the standard model we all learned, but on the right, you have this radical new idea put forward by the site's original lead archaeologist, the late Klaus Schmidt. He basically said, hey, what if we've had it backwards this whole time? Maybe the shared belief system, the organized religion that brought people together to build this incredible place, maybe that came first. And the huge challenge of feeding hundreds of workers who gathered here for these giant projects, maybe that's what actually kickstarted the invention of agriculture. Religion wasn't a product of civilization, it was the catalyst.
So this totally radical theory immediately sparks this huge debate that is still going on today. Who exactly were these master builders? Were they really just nomadic hunter-gatherers, or were they something else entirely?
Schmidt's first theory was just electrifying. He argued this was a cathedral on a hill, like a central pilgrimage site that was built by different nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers from all over the region. I mean, this idea suggested that our ancient ancestors were way more socially and spiritually complex, far earlier than we ever gave them credit for.
And you just can't deny how sophisticated they were. Just look at the artistry here. This incredibly detailed relief of a fox was carved into solid limestone using nothing more than simple flint tools, like the ones you see there. The level of skill and, abstract thought it would take to create this with Stone Age tech is it's astounding.
But as the digging continued, a more complicated, more nuanced picture started to come into focus. A lot of archaeologists now argue that this classic, clean-cut distinction between hunter-gatherer and farmer is just too simple. They say it's a false choice. The people of Göbekli Tepe weren't necessarily one or the other, but maybe a transitional society caught right in the middle of this slow, massive, revolutionary change.
And the proof for this is literally right there in the dirt. Archaeologists have found tens of thousands of sickle blades, for harvesting grains. They found mortars and pestles and grinding slabs for processing all that cereal. Animal bones show signs they were managing wild herds, which is like a precursor to domestication. And, maybe most importantly, recent analysis has confirmed the presence of the very first morphologically domesticated cereals. So they weren't just gathering wildweed, they were actively starting to farm it.
Now, as you can imagine, the sheer mystery and the incredible sophistication of Göbekli Tepe has attracted other theories from outside of mainstream archaeology. And honestly, they've become a really big part of the public conversation around this site.
For researchers like Graham Hancock, for example, discovering Göbekli Tepe was, in his own words, a total game changer. Its existence actually prompted him to dive back into a central question he'd already been investigating for years.
So the core of this idea is that the incredible skills needed in engineering and stonework, maybe even astronomy, they didn't evolve slowly over time in that region. Instead, they just kind of arrived, fully formed. Proponents of this theory argue that this sudden leap in sophistication points to a transfer of knowledge, maybe from the survivors of a much older, more advanced civilization that was lost to some kind of global cataclysm at the end of the last ice age.
So, look, regardless of which theory you find more convincing, where does all of this leave us? Well, one thing is for sure. The physical evidence right there on that hilltop is forcing us to rewrite the very dawn of civilization.
The new consensus in archaeology isn't as clean as religion first or farming first. It's more complex. It suggests the agricultural revolution wasn't some overnight invention, but a really slow, messy evolution that took place over hundreds, maybe thousands of years. It paints a picture where complex ritual, social organization, and the first baby steps toward farming all developed together. They co-evolved, each one pushing the other forward. The builders of this site lived and breathed on that blurry line.
And this brings us to what might be the most crucial point of all. The greatest revelation from Göbekli Tepe isn't really about some simple contest between religion and farming. It suggests that the fundamental human need to gather for a shared purpose, to build something magnificent together, that deep drive wasn't a luxury that came after civilization was established, it was the very engine that built it.
In the end, Göbekli Tepe replaces an old, simple answer with a brand new, much more profound question. It shows us that the beginning of our story wasn't a straight line, but a deeply complex and interwoven process. One that, thanks to these mysterious stones, we are only now, 11,600 years later, truly beginning to understand.
For thousands of years, one question has towered over history. How on earth did they build the Great Pyramid of Giza? Well, in this explainer, we're going to follow the clues to uncover one of the greatest engineering stories of all time.
Okay, let's just take a moment and really look at this thing. It's the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. For nearly 4,000 years, this was the tallest man-made structure on Earth. The sheer scale of it is, well, it's just mind-boggling. To really get a sense of the scale, think about this. The builders had to quarry, transport, and place a new block, each one weighing more than an SUV, every few minutes, every single day, for over 20 years. So how in the world did they do it?
Now, a feat this huge is bound to spark some wild theories, and they're out there. Aliens, lost sciences, you name it. But today, we're going to follow the actual archaeological clues, from lost cities to ancient logbooks, to uncover the real story. And honestly, it's far more remarkable than any of that.
So our investigation starts by tackling the biggest myth of them all. Who actually built the pyramids?
The first thing you need to do is forget that Hollywood image of slaves being whipped under the hot sun. The evidence points to something completely different, a well-cared-for, skilled, and highly organized workforce. And the key to understanding this is just south of the Giza Plateau.
What you're looking at here are the foundations of a bustling city, built specifically for the pyramid workers. This wasn't some temporary camp, It was a complex, urban center with streets, bakeries, and permanent housing. And when archaeologists dug in, they found these people ate better than most Egyptians, We're talking huge amounts of prime beef, which was typically food for the elite. This tells us these were highly valued specialists, not an expendable labor force.
And get this, they even found graffiti inside the pyramids left by the work gangs with names like the Friends of Khufu and the Drunkards of Menkaure. That sounds like team pride, not forced labor, right? All this evidence points to one thing. This was a national project built by proud, organized teams of Egyptians.
Okay, so now that we've got a good idea of who built them, we turn to the how, specifically the incredible logistics. And the answer, amazingly, came from a remote cave near the Red Sea.
This is the personal diary of a man on the front lines, a guy named Mir. He was an official who led a crew of about 200 guys, and he gives us this incredible first-hand account of the massive supply chain, detailing his team's work in meticulous half-day chunks. Mir's logbook lays out this sophisticated transport system. He talks about loading the fine white Tura limestone. That's the stuff for the pyramid's gleaming outer shell, and sailing it right up to a port at the base of the Giza Plateau, through this whole network of man-made canals.
So what about for moving blocks on land? Well, they had this ingenious technique. You can see it right here in this tomb painting. Massive wooden sleds hauled by teams of men, and there's a worker out front pouring water on the sand. That simple act of lubrication would have drastically cut down the friction. Just brilliant. All right, but that brings us to the greatest engineering challenge of all, lifting millions of tons of stone nearly 500 feet into the air. This is the big one, the question that's been debated for centuries.
For decades, there were two leading theories, and both have major problems. A single long ramp would have needed to be over a mile long, using more stone than the pyramid itself. And a ramp wrapping around the outside? That would have made it impossible for the architects to check their angles and keep that perfect pyramid shape.
But a modern theory, from architect Jean-Pierre Houdin, offers a brilliant solution. He thinks they used an external ramp for maybe the bottom third, and then they built a ramp inside the structure itself, spiraling all the way to the top. And there's physical evidence for this. High up on the pyramid's corner, there's this unexplained notch, exactly where you'd need an opening to pivot the blocks. Even crazier, microgravity scans have actually shown a low-density spiral shape inside the pyramid, perfectly matching the path of this hidden ramp.
And very recently, discoveries elsewhere in Egypt have confirmed they had the know-how for this kind of thing. This ramp system found at a quarry proves the Egyptians could haul massive blocks up slopes far steeper than we ever thought possible, making an internal ramp totally feasible. So, when you piece all these clues together, the skilled workforce, the meticulous logistics, the brilliant internal ramp, the picture becomes clear.
The construction wasn't just massive, it was incredibly precise. Just look at the few remaining outer casing stones. The craftsmanship is almost flawless. Originally, the whole pyramid was covered in these polished blocks, so it would have shone like a jewel in the desert.
And this kind of precision was possible because they used standardized tools. They had the royal cubit, which was their universal ruler, and to get that perfect angle, they used a system called the shrouded. It was a simple, brilliant way to make sure every single block was cut to the exact same slope.
So, in the end, the pyramids weren't built by a mysterious force. They were built by something way more impressive, the power of human organization. This was a triumph of planning, resource management, and a shared national purpose.
Ultimately, the Great Pyramid stands as a testament not to some forgotten magic, but to the incredible potential of human collaboration and careful, ambitious planning.
And this whole thing leaves us with a final thought. It shows what's possible when a society mobilizes everything towards a single monumental goal. It really makes you wonder, what seemingly impossible challenge could we solve if we organized on such a grand scale today?
You know, it feels like Roman ruins are everywhere you look, from the chilly shores of Britain all the way to the Middle East. Their buildings have just refused to fall down. They built an empire of stone so tough that, in a way, we're still living in its shadow. But this isn't just a history lesson. This is about pure, unadulterated genius. So how on earth did they do it? Well, that's what we're here to figure out. I mean, just look at this thing. This is the Pont du Gard in France. For 2,000 years, it's been standing there. It's almost 50 meters high. That's like a 15-story building, pieced together with stone blocks weighing up to 6 tons apiece. And this isn't some one-off wonder. This is just a taste of the thousands of incredible structures they left behind. Which, of course, brings us to the real question, doesn't it? When you have no electricity, no lasers, no diesel engines. How do you possibly achieve this kind of scale and precision? How did they build something to last for millennia? All right, let's get into it. Well, before even one stone was moved, the Romans planned. Everything they did started with a blueprint. This wasn't luck or just brute force. It was calculated, meticulous design. They were absolute masters of surveying, and they could turn a wild, chaotic landscape into a perfectly ordered grid for a new city or a military fort. And this little gadget right here, this was one of their secret weapons. I know, it looks pretty simple, doesn't it? It's called a groma. It's basically a cross with some weighted strings hanging off it. But by lining up those strings, a Roman surveyor could map out perfect 90-degree angles over any kind of ground. This humble little tool is the real reason Roman roads are so famously, ridiculously straight. It was all about precision, right from step one. Okay, so you've got your master plan. Now, you need the actual materials. And this is where the sheer, mind-boggling scale of Roman ambition really hits you. We're talking about literally slicing up mountains into building blocks and then hauling them, sometimes for hundreds and hundreds of miles. And they had a really clever system for it. First, workers would cut these deep grooves into a rock face, basically drawing an outline of the block they wanted. Then they hammered in wedges. And get this, if the wedges were wooden, they'd soak them with water. The wood would swell up and pop. The rock would split right off. With iron wedges, it just took a few good swings. A nice, clean break, and you've got yourself a brand new building block. Now, getting that giant stone block from the quarry to the building site, that was a whole other challenge. This was about pure, organized muscle. Just try to picture it. Armies of laborers and teams of oxen, all straining to drag these multi-ton blocks on sledges or rolling them over a carpet of logs. It was slow, backbreaking work, but their logistical machine was relentless, constantly feeding the empire's hunger for new construction. But moving stones along the ground is one thing. How did they lift them up? This is where they got really smart. So on the left, you see the basic physics of a pulley system. Pretty simple. But on the right, that's an actual carving from an ancient Roman tomb, and it shows that exact same principle at work in one of their massive cranes. They completely understood mechanical advantage, how to use simple machines to multiply their strength and lift things that would otherwise be impossible. So what was the engine for this incredible machine? Well, it was people. The crane was powered by what was essentially a giant hamster wheel for humans. Seriously, a few men just walking inside this huge wooden wheel could generate enough power to hoist enormous columns high up into the air. It's just a perfect example of their practical, hands-on ingenuity. Now, lifting big stones is impressive for sure, but other ancient cultures had done that. The Romans, though, had a true ace up their sleeve, a revolutionary material that let them build bigger, faster, and in shapes no one had ever dreamed of before. They called it opus caementitium. We just call it Roman concrete. And the secret sauce was a special kind of volcanic ash called pozzolana. When you mix that with lime and water, it creates this incredibly strong mortar. But here's the truly amazing part. It could set and harden underwater. Just think about that for a second. Suddenly, building sturdy bridges, harbors, and aqueducts became infinitely easier. This wasn't just a new material, it was a total game changer. Their technique was brilliant, too. They'd build two thin outer walls, kind of like a mold, and then just pour the liquid concrete mixture right into the gap. Early on, they used styles like this one, opus incertum, which uses all these small, irregular stones. Hey, it was functional, but they were just getting warmed up. Pretty soon, they started getting fancier. This is opus reticulatum. You can see that cool net lake diamond pattern. This wasn't just about making the walls stronger, it was about aesthetics. This was a look that just screamed Rome, orderly, powerful, and precise. And eventually, you get to things like opus mixtum, where they're combining different materials like bands of brick with stone. So the bottom line is this. Concrete let them use smaller, cheaper materials and less skilled labor to create massive, flexible, and unbelievably strong buildings. It was like they'd found the ultimate construction cheat code. So it all seems to fit together perfectly, right? Smart planning, heavy-duty cranes, and miracle concrete. It's the perfect recipe, except it isn't. Because out in a remote corner of the empire, there's something that just doesn't fit the pattern. Something that breaks all the rules and leaves us with a profound mystery. Our story now takes us to Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon. The Romans built an absolutely colossal temple complex here, dedicated to Jupiter. This was one of the grandest sanctuaries in the entire empire, a real showpiece of their power and engineering skill. But here's where it gets really weird. The Roman temple itself, as amazing as it is, it's sitting on top of a platform made of stones that are far, far bigger than anything the Romans are known to have built anywhere else. On one side of this platform are 3 massive monoliths. They're known as the Trilithon, and each one of them is estimated to weigh around 800 tons. Let that sink in. 800 tons. That's the weight of about 600 cars packed into a single block of stone. Now, for some perspective, we know from Roman records that the heaviest object they ever bragged about moving was an Egyptian obelisk that weighed 455 tons. And trust me, they wrote about it, they celebrated it, it was a huge deal. Yet these 800-ton stones at Baalbek, the foundation of one of their most important temples, complete and total silence. No records, no inscriptions, nothing. Why? Take a look at this engraving. It shows the incredible effort it took back in the 1500s to move a 250-ton obelisk in Rome. Hundreds of men, dozens of horses, all this complex machinery, it was considered a miracle of Renaissance engineering. And the stones at Baalbek are more than 3 times heavier. The silence from the normally boastful Romans is deafening. Which makes you wonder, did they actually move those stones, or were they already there when the Romans arrived? So when we look at what the Romans left behind in stone, we're really left with 2 parallel stories. One is a story of documented, undeniable genius, and the other is a deep and deeply fascinating mystery. We know for a fact what the Romans could do. They surveyed with incredible precision, they lifted with ingenious machines, and they built with a material that literally transformed the art of architecture. Their entire blueprint was one of order, strength, and raw power. And yet, places like Baalbek are a powerful reminder that history isn't a closed book. The stones don't always give up their secrets so easily. The Roman legacy is a testament to what we know humanity can achieve. But it also holds puzzles that challenge our assumptions and make us ask that thrilling question, what else don't we know?